Hello, everybody. This is Venkat back in session 2 for Java Basics on Hadoop. Hope it would have been an interesting earlier session. You would have downloaded your Java Development Kit and the Eclipse. You would have tried this hands on because there is no shortcut to success. It's pure hard work. And what we have seen till now is we have seen what is the basics of Java, how do we create a project. We haven't dived deep into each of the terms that we have done in the code, but that's fine. We saw real quickly what are the various programming languages, what is basically an object. Let me do a word wrap here so that it will be easy for you. There we go. What is Java? What are the four pillars of OOPS? And we saw a quick hands-on by creating a small project in Java, which we will be running it right now. Once again, there we go, so that it will build that particular project and show the output to you onto your console. So if you have done till here in your earlier session, that's good. So let's continue from where we had left off. So hope you would have also started reading the book, the Java Complete Reference, because this is going to be a concise course on what is the prerequisites for Java. So if you would need to do a little bit more further analysis, reading up a little bit of additional stuff would of course be very helpful to you. So the best book, like I said, is the Java Complete Reference. And in case if you would want to go down for another book, there is a book called as Java Head Start. So you can get ahead with that particular book, Java Head Start, and that's also a pretty decent book. So let's move on from where we had left off in our session 1 with the four pillars of OOPS. We also did our first example of creating a project and running the same. Okay, so now after seeing the very first example, you would have seen that the entry point in a code would be the main method. It has been the entry point in C++, it was in C, and it is there in C# too, and of course it is there in Java too. And the signature of the entry point is main. In C, it was taking a array of characters. It was taking argc and argv, and in Java, it takes an array of string. In C++ and other languages, it was returning something else, but in Java, the main method should not return anything. And the public is the access modifier. There are 4 access modifiers in Java. So it's a good time to bring across to you what are the different access modifiers in Java. That is going to be from the most restrictive to the most widest. The most restrictive is private. Then we have got something called as package access, where the scope is within a package. A package is nothing but let's assume for the time being, since we haven't created any package till now, the package would primarily be the folder within a package. For the time being, you can assume that it is going to be a folder. I'll close this. Let me close this square bracket. The next one would be protected, which is actually wider than the package access, and the final one is public. So these are the various access modifiers that we have in Java. So let me go back to the diagram, to the code. Other than that, we have seen what is a static keyword. We will talk more about static, non-static as we go ahead. So let's go back and see what we have to do further after taking up the first basic code of understanding how to go ahead with a project. The next thing that is important for you to understand is the concept of variables. A variable is nothing but a memory place where some value can be stored. Okay, let's say if you say int age is equal to, let's say, 25, So over here, age is a variable which is of type int, and typically people say it's of integral type. You'll see very soon why am I saying int, and then the value of that is 25. So a variable is nothing but a memory place where some values are stored. There are three types of variables. We have based on scope. So let me say based on scope, the different types of variables are, let's say, class variable whose scope is throughout the class. Then we have got method variable. We will very soon see what is a class variable. The class variable is the scope is throughout the class and is declared outside all methods but within a class. So you might be thinking of what is a method. So if you go back to the code, the main is actually a method. Remember we had mentioned about state and behavior. There are two things that would be there in any real world entity. There would be a state and there would be a behavior. A state is nothing but the attributes like what I had mentioned earlier, and attributes can be of different categories based on the scope. So method variables scope is only within the method in which it is declared. And the third one is going to be a instance variable. So we will talk about instance variable as and when we reach there, because right now it might be a little bit too early for you to understand what that is. So let's go ahead and see a simple example of what might be a variable and then how do I use it in my code. So let me go back to my Eclipse over here. We have seen this project. So let's create a class. We can go ahead and create another project, but then I'm going to keep everything inside over here to logically bring together, that is the basics of Java to be there in first Java project. So I'll go down to com.advancer and create a new class for you. And I'm going to call that class as, let's say, class variable. It's always better to have a meaningful name to a class. And of course, that should have, let's call it as class variable main, public static void main, and I will say OK. So again, why did I have public static void main? Because that is what is going to be the entry point. So here I'm going to show it to you that it is not necessary that every class should have a main. Only the class which is going to be launched should have a main. And in this, what am I going to do is, we can have multiple classes in the same Java file only if they are logically related. Otherwise, the best practice is to have a class in its own Java file. So this is the reason I call it as main, is because this is what is going to be the entry point. So let me create one more class. Although it is logically related, we are going to follow the best practice of how are classes created. Instead of putting everything into one, I am trying to call it in a form in which it can be reused. So I'm going to call something called as class variable, and I would say finish. I don't need public static void main because that is not going to be the entry point. This class variable, let's say, is going to have some attributes. So let's have an attribute called as int id is equal to, let's say, 10, or let's keep int id as a variable without initializing the value. So I'm only declaring a variable. So this is declaration of a class variable would be the right way to write it in this fashion. Okay. So now after that, I'm going to have one more variable called as string name. So I'm declaring a variable of name with the type string. Sorry, that should have been a semicolon. That's the reason why it is giving an error. and I'm going to have some functions over here called as void display, okay, which is going to let's say display the name and ID of the student. So I would say system dot, you remember last time I had mentioned, if you want to print anything, you will have to call it with system dot out dot println, where system is a class, out is a variable of type print stream, and println is a function inside that. So I'm going to say system dot out dot println, okay, and what am I going to print over here is the ID plus equal to plus the name of the variable. That is it. So here you see that the class variable has got some attributes of type int and name, of ID and name, and it has got a function which will print it out. Now I'm going to use these things in my main class. So there are two separate classes. This is one class and I have got another class. So since this is the entry point, if I want to use these things, how do I go ahead and do it? So one way is I could have initialized these variables here, or I could have initialized them in a method also. So right now we don't have any parameters that has been passed to a method. A method can take in its bracket some parameters. That parameter is ideally used for some purpose within the method. So let's say I want to initialize it. So I would write a method called as initialize, which would take a int I and a string n, and whatever is the initialization that we are doing, I would be done inside that. I would say ID is equal to I, and I would say name is equal to s, is equal to n in this example, and I would save this. So see, I have got two functions. One is to print out the value, another is to initialize the value. And then in my main example, if I have to use another object, remember we are talking about object oriented programming. So these are two separate classes. To bring this class over here, you have to create something called as an instance of a class. So a new word for calling methods and variables of a class, we should create a instance of the class. So what would this instance be? The instance would have a, let me scroll down a little bit, okay, would have a copy of all the class variables, and okay, I would say it would have a copy of all non-static. You will see very soon the difference between static and non-static. It would have a copy of all non-static class variables and methods of the class, and it would have B, a reference to all static class variables and methods of the class. I'm talking about non-static class variables, and to be precise, I can say non-static methods of the class, static class variables, and static methods of the class. So a class can have static and non-static. So in the current use case, what are we having in our class variable? We are having methods that is not static because we haven't written the word static, whereas our main method has got something called as static. Okay, we will very soon see why static. So let's do it step by step for our clearer understanding. So we have created something called as a instance of a class. We should create an instance of the class. So how do we create an instance of the class? Creating instance means creating another memory location to access the variables of the class. I'm sorry if my volume was a little bit low right now. So I was not aware that the audio was a little bit low, so that was a primary reason. So I have increased the volume so that now it should be pretty much audible for you. My apologies for that. So creating instances means creating memory location for the class. And how do I create memory locations? Memory locations are always created with the new keyword. So let me go ahead and create a memory for the class. So what is the name of the class? Class variable. So I'll say class variable x is equal to new class variable. So I have created a instance of the class. What will this instance x have? The instance x will have a copy of all non-static class variables because that is the only thing that we have right now. Okay, so it would have a copy of ID, name, display, and initialize. So let me call the functions to initialize the values. I would say x dot. If I say initialize, you can see over here, it will come up in the IntelliSense of whatever we have initialized, we have declared earlier. I would say initialize, and the first one is going to be a integral value int. Yep, that's correct. So let me say 101, and the second one is going to be the name. Let me say ABC. So I have initialized some values, and now I can print that particular value by saying x dot display, and I will save this. So this is what we have done now. We have created a class which has got some attributes, which has got some methods, and I'm using that in another code in my main, in my another place where the entry point is the main, and I create an instance of the class so that I get some memory address, I initialize it, and I display it. So let me run this. So when you run this, you will see that it would have initialized the value and it will have printed that. Now, since we did not have any system.out.println inside this particular function, so that's the reason why we did not have any, it did not print me anything, but it has actually gone ahead and it has initialized, and when I call display, it has actually printed out the values. So what we have seen in this example is the meaning of what is a class variable. So what is a class variable here? So in our example, both ID and name are called as class variables because they are declared outside functions but within a class, and the scope is throughout the class. You can see here I'm accessing that variables in two separate methods. It's perfectly valid. So this is what is an example of a class variable, folks. Hope that makes it clear for you. Now let's go ahead and see what is a method variable. So we have seen what is a class variable. Scope is throughout the class. For calling a function, we should create an instance of the class. Instance will have a copy of these things. An instance means creating a memory location for the class. Now let's take an example for a method variable. So I'm going to say file, close all, and I'm going to say create one more class called as method variable. So I'm going to say class, and I would say method variable, and I will have public static void main, and I will say finish. So and as you would know that this is what is going to be the entry point, so that's the reason I have written main function over here. Now I'm going to write another function over here in the same class by saying, just one sec, yep, void, let's say met1, that is my method 1. And now if I say over here int m and I put it with a semicolon, okay, so what am I doing? I'm declaring a method variable. So anything that is within the function is what is called as a method variable. The scope of the method variable is only within that particular method. And now let me print it out by saying system, and if you say sysout, sys out and press Control and space, you will see that it will come automatically. Okay, so that's what we will be doing. There are some keyboard shortcuts that would make our development pretty easy. So now I'm going to say the value of the method variable is equal to plus m, and let me save this. But then the moment I print it out, it comes back with an error, and if I take my mouse on top of the error, it says local variable m might not have been initialized. So that is pretty tricky. So the rule here is I did not initialize my class variables, but it never gave me an error. But if I don't initialize my method variable, it will give me an error. So that's perfectly understandable, because method variables always should be initialized before their usage in the class. So that is what the rule is. So we can't circumvent that rule. So I need to initialize the variable. So let me say the variable is equal to 10. Okay, so I've got a function, I've got a method variable. The scope of the method variable is only inside this class. Sorry, only inside this function. My apologies. And I'm printing out the value of the variable. Now to call this method in my main, although both of them are there in the same class, still class is only a virtual entity and not a physical entity. I need to create an instance of the class. So let me create an instance of the method variable. So I would say let's test it without calling it. So if I write call met1 directly, because some of you might have felt that both the methods are there in the same class, so why can't I call it without creating an instance? So when I call it directly, you will see over here in the error of the method that cannot make a static reference to a non-static met1 from the type method variable. So since my main is static, we will see it as we go ahead. This is just for the understanding right now. Static methods can access only other static things. It cannot access non-static methods or variables. So we haven't seen static, non-static, so don't worry, we will leave it at that for the time being. We know that it's going to give me an error. So let me copy this error and keep it for you, because this is something that is at the heart of the way how it's done. So let me press enter, and now let me comment this. So I'm going to comment these two lines, and I will say Shift Control / will come up with a multi-line comment. Of course, I can. What is a multi-line comment? Across multiple lines. You can say / and star, and then say star and /. But if you say Shift Control O, it will comment the whole thing. And if I go back here and I press Shift Control /, that is the way how you'll comment it. Okay. So that's done. So now we know that I need an instance of the class, so let's go ahead and do that. I would say method control space will always give me the option of autocomplete. So I will say method variable p is equal to new method variable control space. So I have created an instance of the class, and you know that from the instance of the class I can call the non-static methods and variables of the class. So let me go ahead and call that. So we know what an instance is all about. See over here, it has got a copy of all non-static class variables and non-static methods and a reference. So I can call it with the instance name. The instance name is p. I'll say dot my method one, and I will save this. So this is done. So now if I run this code, you will see that it is going to print it and give me the output that the value of the method variable is 10. So this is the way how you will create your own method variable. So hope it's getting interesting now. Okay, we saw what is a class variable, we saw what is a method variable, we know that for creating instances of the class I have to say the new keyword. And now let's talk about instance variable. So for understanding what is an instance variable, you should know what are the difference between static and non-static. So please note, static is always associated with the class or is associated at the class level, whereas non-static is associated at the instance level. So whenever I say anything as non-static, it's always at the instance level, whereas static is always at the class level. Okay? So whenever I say something as static, that means it is associated at the class level. So when we go back over here and say static, main is associated at the method variable level, whereas non-static is associated at the instance level. That's the reason why I have to create an instance of the class. Fine. So now let's also make some other differentiations. Static variables and methods can be directly called with the class name, whereas non-static variables and methods can be only called with the instance name. Okay, so because it is associated at the class level, it can directly be called with the class name, whereas non-static always needs instance name. You have seen over here, this is a non-static variable. I created instance of the class and then I'm calling it. So now to understand what is static and non-static, we should now to understand what is instance variable, we should know the difference between static and non-static. So let's take up a quick example to see that, folks. So let me go ahead and create a class, and I'm going to call the class as instance variable. And of course I will have my, let's call it as instance variable main, so that I can call it with the public static void main. And I could have kept another class outside it, but just for the purpose of simplicity, so that now you know what the difference is in creating two separate Java files, I'm just going to show you, since they're totally interrelated, I'm going to say something as class. You cannot have two public classes, remember. In one Java file, you can have only one class. You cannot have more than one class. So I'm going to say class, and I'm going to say IV, that is instance variable. This is going to have int a is equal to 10. I'm declaring and initializing a variable. Then I will say int b is equal to 20. And b is going to be static. The a was non-static, whereas b is going to be static. Okay. Then what am I going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a function over here for doing something, void print, and I just want to show you the differences. So now I'll create an instance of the class, that is IV, and I will say m1 is equal to new instance variable, and then I will say m1 dot a is equal to, let's say 30, and I will say m1 dot b is equal to 40. So I created two variables. Okay. Then I'm going to create one more variable called as instance, not variable. Instance variable m2 is equal to new instance variable, and I would say m2 dot a is equal to 50, and I would say m2 dot b is equal to 60. So I have got three variables, two instances, and I have four variables. Now please note, when I say m1 dot a is a static variable. So what the static variable means is, you know that static variables are associated at the class level. So let me give you another point. Static variables have only one memory location which is shared by all the instances of the class. static, okay, whereas non-static variables can have separate values based on their instances. So if you are having a non-static variable, you can have separate values. So let me go back. So here you see here static variable, I've made it as 30, so it has changed the original to from 10. But then is it static? Sorry, it is non-static. So here I would say the value of A is only for the instance M1. Whereas over here, since B is static, it has changed the original to 40. The original value to 40. Now when I say M2.A is equal to 50, the value of B is only for the instance M2. And when I say static again, now the current value of B is 60. Because I've changed that value, right? It has changed the original value. I should say that is right. I should say the current value of B is 60. That's correct because I've changed the original to 60. Now if I create a third instance variable M3 is equal to new instance variable, and let me print out the values. So let me minimize this so that you can actually see the things being worked. So if I say sysout of M3.A and then I say sysout of M3.B, okay, let's call this whole function in my main. So for calling a non-static function, what is needed? An instance of the class is needed. So instance variable P is equal to new instance variable, and then I will say over here, and by the way, the reason why I created instances inside this is just to show you that the difference between static and non-static. Okay, so let me go ahead and create one more instance over here, and I will say p dot print. So what do you think would be the current value of A and B? The value of A was 10 originally. It got changed to 30, but it was only for the instance M1. It was changed to 50, but that was only for the instance M2. So the current value of A should be 10. And since static has got a shared memory location as what we had mentioned, okay, all the instances share the same location. So what has happened over here is the value from 20 got changed to 40, and now it got changed to 60. So when we run this example, let me take this up a little bit. It should be 10 and 60, friends. The reason it is 10 is because non-static variable would have the same value. Whatever you change is for different instances. Static variables have only one memory location and all instances share the same thing. So that's the difference between static and non-static variables, folks. So hope your concepts about variables are clear. That's what we have seen in the session 2 for today. We saw that entry point into the code would be the main method. We will see later on what are the different access modifiers. We spoke about variables, which is nothing but a name given to a memory location having some value. 3 types of variables: class variable, method variable, which should be initialized, and third one is instance variables. So if I go back to the method variable, just one sec, you know that the value should be initialized. Let me document it over here. The value should be always initialized before the usage. So this makes your concepts clear, folks. So hope you have enjoyed the session 2, which was about the variables. We are going to do step by step. Okay, we have seen what are the basics. So to supplement what you have done till now, please go through either Head First Java or to complete reference, and it would be very clear for you. So thanks everybody, folks, and we will come back with another session of basics of Java for Hadoop. Thanks. Bye bye from Venkat.